Our next speaker is Matt Ferner from the San Francisco Bay NER.
Thanks, Kirstine. Um, let's see. Are you looking at the right view now?
Perfect.
Okay, good. I appreciate that. That's great to see Mars 2.0 on the horizon. I'm sure we'll be able to help make that happen with everyone. Thanks, everybody. These are a couple pictures of our reserve sites, China Camp and Rush Ranch. And the background in our estuary in San Francisco is that we've lost the vast majority of our tidal wetlands to development and agriculture. And there has been an increasing focus on restoration regionally and also on restoration science. But it comes with the hook of needing to monitor new projects for regulatory permitting requirements to make sure that projects are performing, especially with all the taxpayer funding behind them. And what I'd like to do today is just to highlight a few early milestones of our wetland and water level monitoring and outreach, mostly focused on outreach, which is a little different than the other talks. But I'll just mention first, in 2011, we finished our first habitat map at China Camp, pictured in the bottom left there. We went on to add our vertical control marks and our vegetation monitoring transects and the other infrastructure in the marsh. The next year, we gave a key conference presentation that didn't really realize the significance of right away, but it became more clear as time went on that that was a turning point in the impact of our NERS program regionally. And then most importantly, in 2017, Mike Vasey, Amy Good, and Heidi Nutters helped to form a core team that jump-started the San Francisco Estuary Wetland Regional Monitoring Program, or WRMP. I'll focus most of the talk on that. But I'll start with just a quick flashback to a few of the key slides from this 2012 presentation. The audience for that was a large group of federal and state agency staff and some resource managers and scientists and other coastal decision makers. And I started with just a plug for the Sentinel Site Program approach, looking at sea level rise impacts. And I thought this was a pretty standard way of doing business. It's not just a NOAA approach, but shared at USGS and other agencies too. To start with good applied science, translate that into data products and tools, and then use those to inform decision making and to promote education and ultimately coastal stewardship. It turned out a lot of people in the room hadn't thought of the process in quite this way, and just this slide alone made a big impact on some of the thinking, and we heard back about that time and time again over the years. I gave a brief overview of the system-wide monitoring program, how we use standardized approaches for data collection, and also how we use NERS sites as reference locations for nearby restoration projects. And then I couldn't help but plug the NGS approach of highlighting the fundamental importance of vertical control and then following water levels, tracking on marsh elevation, groundwater levels, and finally vegetation transects and habitat mapping for sort of the ecosystem, or habitat assessment kind of piece. And I ended the presentation with my own proposal of strategies to create a regional tidal marsh monitoring network. I suggested that we start with the NERS because these sites are fundamental. We've been collecting all these data. We have some similar goals to what our regional folks seem to have been wanting. I suggested they could do that through some clear strategies, incorporate our protocols, add new ones, pay attention to data management, level existing funding support, which at the time the Sentinel Site Cooperative stood out for that, and then collaborate with decision makers to make some of these products and tools that people wanted. This seems so obvious in retrospect, but it really was some new ideas for people in the room that they percolated on. And a lot of people came together and worked really hard over a long period of time. I must admit, I was not one of those people. I refocused pretty much right after this presentation on the groundwork. But suffice it to say, about a decade went by, and now here we are with a fully functional program, implementations beginning this year. I encourage you to check out the website and learn more about it. It's run by the San Francisco Estuary Partnership and the San Francisco Estuary Institute, funded in large part by EPA, and has a huge number of partners, agencies, and organizations around the area contributing in many ways to this program. And again, our milestone for us is that the NER really contributed to this original team that got this off the ground. They developed a science framework that started with big picture questions and stepped down from those to on-the-ground data collection. The NER also convened the initial set of technical workshops over a couple of years right before the pandemic, and that transformed into the Technical Advisory Committee that still persists today and led to a conceptual model for the program. This is a lot of detail. You don't need to pay attention to any of that. I'll just highlight that the focus was essentially to link the external drivers to internal wetland conditions, identify key processes that needed to be monitored, and then link the data from those monitoring efforts to the management questions that everyone wanted answers for. So this idealized site layout should look familiar to all of you, is similar to early diagrams of our Sentinel site program, now water and wetlands and water level monitoring. A little network of upland benchmarks linked to monitoring of water levels and surface elevations and vegetation in the marshes. And for the WRMP, they anchored these networks of sites with what they called benchmark sites, and that included the NER component sites. So our estuary was broken up into 5 subregions, and each region had prioritized networks and secondary networks, and China Camp and Rush Ranch are the benchmark sites for 2 of those networks. Here's an example of one of those with China Camp at the bottom, a reference site just above it, and then a restoration site above that with additional restoration sites further north. And essentially at our benchmark sites, we're just doing our wetlands and water level monitoring, and that's combined with some other complementary data that's been collected over the years. And here's another picture of that network where you can see the other data from the sites to the north that have already been collected in past programs. Going forward, the wetlands water level monitoring from the NER site will be essentially rolled out and replicated with some modifications across these other areas so that everything matches up and the data can be looked at together. And I should mention that SFEI has done a phenomenal job on some remote sensing, habitat classification, mapping work just released this year that is really going to add value to this program and combine with the on-the-ground data. And the goal of that is just to create these regional products for the managers that help them track on the status of wetlands in the estuary and especially the restoration projects that people are most interested in following. We're continuing to stay connected to this program and try to strengthen those connections. These are some pictures from just last Friday, a few days ago. Mike Vasey and Anna Deck in the marsh starting our ecotone transect monitoring. And I'll just end by saying that I think this WRMP also has some lessons that we can take away at the NERS level. They have a very active people in wetlands work group that I think is probably going to be the shining star of this program in the end. This is focused on their goals are to highlight why wetlands are important, help wetland managers increase the benefits of those habitats for people, and help evaluate progress on the mandates around environmental equity. And the last slide is just highlighting that it's not just a lip service kind of work group. They're really putting serious effort into developing indicators, metrics, protocols, and standards for data collection around human connections to wetlands. And it's just an awesome program. So thanks for listening, and I think we're at a break.
We definitely have time for questions if people want to put anything in the chat or come off mute to ask Matt a question. I've been involved on the periphery of that project and it's super impressive, but what a huge estuary with so many players involved.
Oh yeah, we are a small fish in the pond, that's for sure.
just highlights the whole spectrum. Our two estuaries, which are adjacent to each other, have such different worlds. We're the main player in our little estuary, and you've got so many different ones. All right. Any other questions, thoughts?